Welcome to the Continued Silence with me, Emma Jane Taylor, on UK Health Radio. The Continued Silence is focused on the very uncomfortable conversation of child sex abuse and the importance of talking openly about this subject. We want to try and normalise the conversation. Child sex abuse is real. It affects millions of people, young and old, across the world. The work we do is very much engaging more lateral thought processes on this terrible crime, supporting survivors, protecting children, and helping those not wanting to listen to listen. Joining me each show is my resident panel, therapist Denny Corby, activist Chris Tuck, and usually Mike Borton, my resident poet. But unfortunately, Mike can't be with us today. We do have a poem, which we will try and squeeze in today. It might have to be me that reads it. I will do my best. Each week, we will be joined by guests from all around the world to share more insights on this crippling conversation and help us to share more important messages. This month, we are joined by James Moffat. James has developed the School Kit for Life, and he's going to be telling us why he's developed this and, of course, what he's learned from his life to bring this forward into schools today. But before that, I want to come to Denny. Denny is my resident therapist, and she's the one who can give us sound advice on lots of things around this conversation and give us insight and support as well. So, Denny, thank you for being here as always and for being part of this show. It's great to have you with us. And of course, we're going to be talking about education in schools and the importance of it, at a high level. Before we have this call today with James, what are your thoughts on education in schools on this conversation?
Hi, Emma Jane. Lovely to be here again. What are my thoughts? Gosh, we cover topics, don't we, that are massive and vast. So I'll try and be succinct. First of all, I don't want to come across as dumping on education. They have a very, very difficult job. They are the institution that most young people spend most of their time within. And so that's very difficult. So I wanted to get that out there. But education, I've worked within it for 20 plus years. And I think probably the most powerful statement that I would like to make at the beginning of this is, what is education? How does it look? And how do young people experience it? Well, it mirrors and reflects rules, power, authority, labels, conformity, and that kind of do as you're told approach. And if you think for a second about young people who are already experiencing abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, within the home, wow, isn't that just a replication of the very thing that they're experiencing at home? So I don't think it's any surprise to me in my career of over 20 years to actually see that the behaviours are going to be hugely played out within a school environment. And that can be anything from difficulties with authority figures, resistance to authority, or the complete opposite, which is a withdrawal and fear and isolation. And I think, if anything today, I'd like to kind of open up the conversation that it isn't just the spoken word that we have to listen for. It's body language. It's young people's reactions to a variety of roles within the school. There's so many clues that can give us a deeper curiosity as to what's going on for a young person. And on top of that, working in specialist provision with acute SEN needs or children with disabilities, who we know are our most vulnerable young people. And I also know through my experience that it's often a lot harder to get through the doors of those institutions. And so I would be putting it out there about how we can do that and how we can get into the very areas that we need to get in and raise awareness.
Wow. Like you say, we don't pick a subject that's easy, do we? I mean, it's like you say, it's big. And actually, you've just made me think something then I hadn't even thought about again. And that's why I love this show and love what we do, because we pick up things all the time. You say education, rules, power, authority. And if you are being abused as a child, those rules, power, and authority are going to be things that you want to fight against. And now I recognize that in me. And I guess when I was at school, I was behaving that way because I was being abused, but now I realize it was layered because of what you just said. And of course, not just me, a lot of people around the world who are struggling that penny may well drop now. Of course, there was that behavior problem because of the complexities around the subject. But when you layer it with what you've just said, and thank you for sharing that, Denny, that's really insightful. Well, for me, that was really insightful. That at school you got rules, power, authority. I mean, it really that was a real penny dropping moment for me.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting aspect of school life, isn't it? Like I say, we spend most of our time as young people within those walls of education, and I'm happy to also share, Emma Jane. I was excluded from school. My behaviour was it was almost safe for me to act out and play out what I couldn't at home. So if there was a figure of authority that I was terrified of at home, I was going to push that. You're not going to tell me what to do in this environment, because actually I'm more unsafe at home. Nothing that happens here can be worse than what's going on at home. And I think it's interesting how our system we've got better, but readily ends up with the ultimate for that young person is an exclusion. You're wrong, you're bad, your behaviour is unacceptable. And I think that's a huge part of my working with people in schools to try and change that.
Really, really interesting. And like you, I was excluded many times, and it just all makes so much more sense. So thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to come to our guest today, James Moffat. James, it's great to have you here with us today, talking about, I guess, your journey, what got you to this point, and why you want to launch, or you have launched, School Kit for Life, and the importance of it. So welcome to the show. And thank you for joining us today. It's not an easy subject, and for the listeners, you are a non-survivor. You weren't directly sexually abused as a child, but you were effective in the dynamics of a situation that you were linked to. What is it, and when was it, James, that you kind of took what you learned as a young person, when you decided, actually, I need to do what I can on this subject too, because of what I know?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, I think all through my life, I've kind of contemplated what could I do with this, and how could I share, not just from what I've learned, but also from others, and put that into some good use that others can benefit from. So it's a learning process, and maybe at the time you don't have the answers, and it's not until later in life when you reflect back at it and you hear other people's stories that you start to understand the meaning of what it was for you at the time. I think maybe because of immaturity and being a child, you haven't experienced life enough to understand what happens when you become an adult, and also to see it from a different perspective. And being an adult now with children of my own, 3 of my own children, I look at it in a different way to how I saw it as a child. I'm looking through the eyes of a child, obviously, when I'm a child. But now as an adult, I can see both from the eyes of a child, but also from an adult's point of view.
And so now you're sort of an adult and you see it, if you what was your key learning as a young person, for what you learned? What was the key turning point? What was the thing that made you go, right, that wasn't acceptable, that wasn't right, and I really want to go forward into schools now? What was that key? Well, the one thing, I guess, I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think the key turning point now is having my own children.
Okay.
Because I don't want my children to go through what I went through and what others are going through and what I've experienced.
Yeah.
So having your own children, you become more defensive over them, and you want to protect them as much as possible.
Okay, that's great, and I think very understandable. I think there'll be a lot of people, I'm going to come to Chris now, there'll be a lot of people who do understand why when you have children things changes. But it's interesting, isn't it, Chris? We become adults, we go through our teens, our 20s, our 30s. We see, you know, some people have been abused, some people are involved and unfortunately on the sidelines watching it. There are allies out there who don't seem to really want to know at all until it's affected them at all. But actually, when you have children, it's a real key turning point on this conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. When I had my son 24 years ago, that's when I first realised that I was impacted by the abuse that I'd gone through. Because when I had him, all I wanted to do was love and protect. And then I realised that was missing in my life, my whole life. So then I thought, well, if I can love this little person, this little human, and I would go to the ends of the earth to protect, love and care for him, why didn't I get that from 4 different caregivers? It was just not there. And that's when I started having a mental health slide until I understood what was going on and I started getting help. So children are the key turning point. And often survivors say to me, when their children get to the age of when their abuse started, that's when the mirror is sort of held up to them. And that's when it sort of hits home to them, the impact of actually what they've gone through and what they're suffering. So, yeah, it is a key turning point.
Actually, I just want to touch on this. Thank you, Chris. That was, again, really insightful, and it's pulled 2 words out of there for me. Love and protect, Denny. You know, as children, we don't know anything, right? You're just born and you grow up. It's when you're older you realize you should be loved and protected, but we just accept what we're given. Now, love and protect are 2 very, very key and powerful words, I believe, in this conversation. And I use that because actually, if they are lacking, that's when it's they become easy targets, right? And I do recognize that in my own life. You become an easy target. So, you know, what James saw, what Chris went through, what I went through, what, you know, Denny, you've experienced in your own life as well. Once you take away key words like love and protect, which, you know, we don't really know anything about them as children, and suddenly someone is coming in who maybe sees that you aren't being loved and protected, and they then throw in love and protection, 2 very powerful words. All sorts of problems come, right, Denny?
Yeah, absolutely. As I was listening to that, I was immediately thinking, look, as a child, all of us can only respond to the environment we're in, to the messages that we're given, to the scripts that we start to believe about ourselves. And that's how we interact with others. That's the only way we learn how to interact with others and communicate. So if that love and protection isn't there, and that comes in many levels, there can be some protective factors that might actually be able to kind of equal things out. But when we're talking about physical, emotional, sexual abuse, there absolutely is not anything that can counter that what's going on. You move towards attention. You crave attention. Sex becomes communication, power, tools that you know how to gain, albeit false affirmation. But if you've grown up thinking that that's all you're worthy of, which is people's physical attention, sexual attention, we carry that script through our lives. And actually, that's what we're most ashamed of a lot of the time. The very thing that is the most natural response to being sexually abused is the thing that most survivors, thrivers, whatever terminology you want to use, that's what burns the shame.
I really agree with that, Denny, as well, because at school, like you girls were saying that you was excluded because you exploded in the way that you communicated. I imploded. I went very quiet and I almost became an introvert. And at school, I actually felt safe in some respects, like I got fed. I had a few close friendships. And it was better for me to be at school than for me to be at home. So all the whilst I was being good at school and being praised at school, that's where I'd like to be more of at school. But obviously you had to go home and you spent holidays at home. So I was almost the opposite to you guys.
I think that's really important, just jumping in there, that I think it's taken a long time for the message to get out there that notice the quiet child, notice the withdrawn child. And if you're looking at that from a transactional analysis point of view, the child ego state operates from either rebellious or adapted child. Many children adapt to the environment they're in to give them what it is that they're needing. And sometimes it's don't notice me, don't look at me, I don't exist. So that's a really important point too, Chris. Thank you.
So James, how does what we've spoken about so far come about with you? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, for me at school, I was kind of two different people. I mean, at home, I was the child that didn't do any wrong and did what I was told, basically. But then with some physical abuse that I endured, then I think you suppress that. You don't want your friends to know about it. And it's something that you believe that it's in my home, that if it happens at home, it kind of stays at home. And so when I went to school, I was this lucky kind of jolly chap, and everything was fine. And I mean, you probably see it in a lot of people. They put on a different character. It's not that it's not them either. It's just the way that they feel more comfortable with. So I was the kind of the joker. I mean, I was fooling around with friends and basically kind of wanted to be the center of attention for the jokes and things that I used to tell, or the stories. I used to share stories. Actually, funny enough, that was where my storytelling originated from, which I didn't realize until someone asked me that. And it all started from there. Now, these stories were kind of happy-go-lucky, fantasy, magical stories. And I just remember walking to school and my friends wanted to walk with me because I used to tell a story. And it was these stories that were kind of a savior in a way, because it's an escapism. While I'm in this magical adventure and using my imagination and creativity, I'm thinking of all the positives and all the wonderful places and things that I wanted. And I shared that with my friends going to school. And so also you mentioned about being a bit of a rebel. I mean, I was a rebel at school, not because I wanted to be, but because at school I stood up for myself, whereas at home I didn't. And at home I was the coward and hide away and back off into a corner. But at school, yeah, I didn't take any nonsense, basically. Now, whether it's from a teacher or someone else. And in that way, I kind of got respect for being outspoken, not because I particularly wanted to be, but I found that was another way to express something that was burning inside. I needed to get out.
It's just such a fascinating conversation. I'm listening and I've got things going off all over me, alarms of questions that I want to ask Denny and speak to you all about, but we're going to have to take a quick short break. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be back here after this short break. Okay, welcome back to the show. So before the break, we are talking about this whole show about education, what we need to do in schools, what we need to do to support the generations now with this conversation, and also understanding safeguarding, Denny. Gosh, so much is coming out of this, when James was sort of saying, he felt when he was being physically abused, he suppressed that. It went on at home, he stays at home. I kind of was thinking, actually, I don't think I even understood that this world that I lived as a child wasn't going on with anybody else, because you just accept that that's what's happening. And as far as you're aware, it could be happening at every house, right? So this is like knowledge. This is information, really important information, I guess, we can share. And how you share it is obviously you've got to be very careful with it. But it's understanding safeguarding roles, helping children to understand what's right and wrong, and understanding how you can do any disclosure, like James is talking about storytelling, which we'll go on to as well. But this conversation, as always, just grows laterally for me.
Sure, and it's interesting, isn't it? Safeguarding, gosh, how that has evolved, and we still have quite a long way to go. We all wear our individual hats as professionals, and I think my experience of working in a truly beautiful multi-agency setting within the youth offending team, it worked. And why did it work? Because we all took responsibility, no matter what profession you were coming from. Safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, from the dinner lady to the TA to the mum in the playground. Everyone is responsible for it. And I think, Emma-Jane, the questions that have come into my head is, okay, so how do we reform? How do we change? How do we make things better? And the first thing is, what do we know? What do we know? Well, what we know is mental health is rising by the day within our young people, okay? We also know that schools hold a huge level of responsibility with this. They are the people that are seeing young people day in and day out. But as I said at the beginning, we also have to be aware there's less funding. There's less access to relevant services. Thresholds to meet the criteria of support services are on the ceiling. And schools are actually genuinely feeling overstretched and overwhelmed. And so there's the first difficulty. And then we think, what is actually happening? What is the reality within the educational setting? And that is that the system is still very much reliant upon the verbal disclosure. So a child verbally tells somebody what's happening to them within the home. Well, how realistic is this? How realistic is this? I mean, how often does that happen? I've worked within education and within a therapeutic setting for over 20 years, and I probably can count verbal disclosures on both hands. It's very rare. We know why. Trust. Why would a young person want to tear apart their family? Trust another adult. So I think we have to move away from looking for the spoken word, and without the spoken word, then we can't deal with this. There is no safeguarding concerns that we can evidence. And so what needs to change? Well, we need to look beyond that. And I think we need to log and get better at monitoring behaviour instead of punitive approaches to behaviour. I think we need to start looking at patterns. Is this happening at the start of the day, a drop-off when they're leaving a family? Is it happening towards the end of the day when they're going home? Is it escalating towards a Friday when the whole weekend is approaching? Summer holidays, half terms, does the behaviour gradually get worse? And I can say, honestly, with my hand on my heart, my experience is yes. Most young people who are experiencing abuse will either withdraw more or their behaviour will escalate. So I think for me, we have to all work at this together, and we have to strip away that disclosure means protection. Disclosure means that's the only area of evidence that we can start to, as a multi-agency team, get involved. I don't know what other people feel about that.
Chris?
Exactly, Denny. I feel that a teacher, in their duty, in their role, if they get to know the children, if they get time to do that, and I know lots of teachers that do that, they go above and beyond for their pupils. And if they get to learn the behaviour, any change in behaviour, then they will be able to sort of like go, okay, what's going on there? If that child is not already being abused. So if any changes in behaviour, have they gone quieter? Are they acting out more? So there's those nuances that they can pick up upon. Also, it's like, for me, when I was at school, I used to hang around the teachers. I used to I was the prefect for everything, because then I felt safe. I felt like I was being looked after. And also when I got told, well done, thank you for my help, and all of those nice things, it fed my self-esteem. And as I said, I wasn't getting that at home. So that was all really nice for me. But equally, I know so many more people that have also acted out, my own siblings, who got in complete trouble at school for fighting and everything. So I do understand there's those two extremes, and then there's everything else in between. And I think for some teachers, especially inexperienced ones, it's probably very difficult to pick up on what behaviours are meaning that
Mm.
someone's being abused within the family home, for example. Because if so many children are acting out, and then so many children are going quiet, who do you listen to? Is it the loudest person or the quietest one? When do you get time to do all of this in between teaching? So I really understand and empathize with teachers. Unfortunately, that is where most of the abuse or disclosures to abuse is picked up.
Well, look, as this conversation, I mean, my notepad is on fire here with things that I'm writing down, and I always say we could have another show out of a show that we've just done. You know, I come at it with the education system. I hear everything that you're saying, Denny. I hear everything that everyone's saying here. I just get really frustrated that we're in the 21st century, that yes, we are further forward with our PHSE. Yes, we are further forward with safeguarding, but we're not further forward enough. And I say that because I just get frustrated. I work with schools also, and I'm going into a school soon, and I've offered to go in again not long after to follow up, but they don't have the time and the space for me, right? Because they're then moving on to another activity on well-being, mental health, which is all really important. All of that is really important, and I'm not saying that it isn't, but when it comes to child sex abuse or abuse in the home, we know how big this problem is. We know because we are here in the thick of it. We see firsthand. We know statistics. Well, they're the statistics we know, right? What about the kids, like you say, who can't come forward, who can't disclose, who can't share? Like James was saying, he suppressed it. So, you know, getting that further forward and quicker is a frustration I have, and I'm sure all of you have and share with me. Not because we don't think the education system's doing enough, just because we feel that this is a really important conversation. And when you're talking about mental health and well-being and emotional health and where does that come from? What is the trigger for that conversation? Is it abuse? Is it physical abuse? Is it sexual abuse? Is it emotional abuse? What is it that's triggering our children? And this would be a conversation for Denny. Do children just develop mental health? Or is there a trigger behind it, such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse?
Well, that's a question and a half, Emma Jane. Well, my understanding and experience and in all the roles that I've had is that there's probably two parts to that. Any form of emotional deregulation, any form of mental health conditions, diagnosis, of course, are often trauma-based. Of course they are. We know that. They come from a traumatic event, a longevity of abuse, and I think we're all very clear on that. I do think we have to be very careful about not assuming that all of those behaviours are around trauma, because I don't think, obviously, that is the case either. There's many research kind of findings and, you know, gosh, the debate around the medical model and all of that around mental health at the moment that's going on. But the fact is there are genetic hereditary mental health conditions that can follow through. But I think bearing that in mind, it's not so much, I think, about having a outcome in your mind when you're with a young person. Yes, we'll be curious. Yes, we'll be asking why, how come. But I think we almost need to come away from what we're thinking of, well, this is sexual abuse or this is physical abuse, because we lose the narrative. We lose the journey. We lose the path and the space that we're spending with the young person. I think for me, it's about lean towards a young person, give them space, give them time, play. And James, I'm really interested in hearing about some of your toolkits, because I do quite a lot of sand tray work where, oh my goodness, what comes out of a sand tray is phenomenal. And it's from a subconscious picking of an object, putting it in the sand. So I guess I'm not slopey shoulders here, but I'm interested in James's opinion really around his storytelling and play, because I think that's really crucial to getting alongside a young person.
Right. Yeah. Storytelling. I mean, I could take up the rest of the show talking about storytelling. I mean, I absolutely love it. And it's something that we all do, although some people obviously better than others. but we all tell stories. And I mean, the storytelling with children actually started mainly with my own children. When my eldest son was, I guess, old enough to listen to bedtime storytelling, we used to, oh, I used to read the typical bedtime stories with him. And I used to get a lot of books. I traveled a lot and I used to pick them up at the airport. And there was always that Mr. Men collection, right? So Mr. Tickle, Mr. Happy, Mr. Small, Mr. Tall, and so on. So these were great. I loved them because they were short, they were easy to read for bedtime. So I started with those. And a point came that my eldest son, Tom, said to me, Daddy, can I have stories about me and my adventures? And I thought, yeah, that's something novel. And he said that I've heard all of these stories so many times, I want to share my stories. So I thought, okay, so then we did it in a different way. So we wanted to do it in a story format. There'd be a start, middle, and an end. And the idea would be obviously to get him to go to sleep and as a bedtime story, not too long, not too boring, but then leveraging on his imagination and his creativity. So then we created something that was absolutely magical. And then we started audio recording it. So I used my mobile phone, and you can download an app with an audio record. And then we started to do that. So we wanted a theme. So these became the Marvelous Adventures. And my son is called Tom. So Tom, and he had a fluffy, or has still, a fluffy bedtime rabbit, which he calls Doodoo, which was actually Doodoo was his very first word. So he called the rabbit Doodoo. So it became the Marvelous Adventures of Tom and Doodoo, and then wherever they're going. So the very, very first one that he thought of was the Marvelous Adventures of Tom and Doodoo going to the moon. And basically it was his story. So we wanted it in a way that it became educational. There was a story. So where's it going on this story? So leveraging on his imagination. And then where do we end up? Which would be going to bed, brushing your teeth, going to bed and saying good night. So this is how it started. And we must have recorded over 400 stories by now. And we have twins as well, a boy and a girl, 3 years younger. And we started with them. And I do it then. My wife keeps saying to me, you're supposed to be putting the kids to bed. And this 15 minutes became like an hour because I'm so engrossed in the stories and I'm kind of the narrator of the story, but I'm leveraging on their imagination and creativity. And it becomes so magical.
Sounds wonderful, James. I mean, it just sounds so wonderful that you have you've created something that you won't be able to see this, but James is actually holding up a book to me. I'm going to ask him to send it to me. Actually, I'm going to have a look at that. But you've created something, James, that is something that you've created from your childhood, which all of us here in this room will relate to that. You've taken that forward to improve the world that you're living in as a father, but you're giving so much to your son in doing so. And that to me is such a beautiful thing. And not only are you helping him develop with the story of start, middle and end and the activities, it's the engagement, right? That's the engagement you've got with your child at the end of the day, that 5 minutes, 10 minutes for some people it could be, but you're making it much more than that. And those are special memories. Okay, look, we're going to come back to this, but we're going to take a short break shortly. I just want to read you Mike's poem. Mike, I hope I do you justice with this. This is called Education. I'm not sure where safe is now or where it's always been. We used to take things for granted, on who we would turn to lean. Now I'm not so sure anymore, whoever it might be. Checks and safety nets required. Trust not for granted. You see, I want it to be a safe place where you can learn. Questions, just not for lessons. Questions, which way to turn. We teach the innocent ones like us when we were very young, but what we teach is different now. Spread the word, abuse undone. Learning will never stop. That's Mike Borton's poem. He is my resident poet here on the Continued Silence. Unfortunately, he can't be with us today, but if you'd like to know more about Mike's work, you can find him at www.thecasualpoet.com. We're going to be back after this short break. Don't go anywhere. Okay, welcome back to the Continued Silence with me, Emma Jane Taylor, and my panel, Denny Corby, Chris Tuck, and to my guest, James Moffat. James, just before the break, and I'm going to get Chris to come in and chat to you as well. So you were talking about storytelling, end of day activities that could help your child settle. It's helping them to be creative, and it's helping them to I guess share important things that you couldn't share as a young boy. You know, Chris, James, take this conversation forward, because these are really important things to consider, aren't they, Chris, with the development of children and communication?
Yeah, I, as a child, used to be a bookworm, and I used to go into the library every lunchtime, and I used to just immerse myself in books because it gave me a different place, as James said earlier, to escape to. And that was my saving grace growing up and attending school, was being able to read and immerse myself in those stories. And when my children came along, I read them books and enjoyed that whole situation and scenario with them. And it's just really empowering to be able to escape to somewhere else if your own reality is not quite right or is abusive. So for me, it was really important to pass on that love of books and pass on that gift of being able to read.
Yeah,
and what you told us, James, is just beautiful. I loved it, what you've shared with us.
Yeah, I found escapism through books as well, and through storytelling. I mean, I used to read kind of the regular books when I was at school, but more so now, I mean, Einstein always said that children have a great imagination and creativity. And if we don't leverage on that, then it's wasted. So I thought, yeah, my kids have an imagination. When they play in their rooms, or they play with their friends, I mean, it is their imagination that's carrying a story forward. And you can always see when they're in a group, which ones are kind of leading, because they have maybe the greater imagination. Not saying that you can't harness that. It's just that maybe they've early adapters of it. And in saying that, I very much want my children in the stories. It's their story. I guide it. So I'm really a guide. I start it off. I mean, it always starts off in a magical way, with the alarm going off at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we play character play as well. We change voices and everything else. And it becomes magical, because it is very much not just the bedtime storytelling. It becomes what I call interactive storytelling. It's not just about me monologuely telling a story or them. It's both. We interact with each other. We create characters, and we address problems. I mean, going into more so about my daughter, I mean, she had a fear of everything. She wouldn't go outside the house. She feared making friends. She feared going in the street. She feared playing. She feared basically everything. So we incorporated that into a story, and then I could save the details, but anyway, she goes on a roller coaster ride, and this was the adventure. She takes her friend with her, which was Charlie. Charlie is the donkey from the farm that they became friends with. I mean, these are magical stories. So anyway.
Jane, sorry to jump in, but I'm sat here and I'm just hearing all of this beautiful, nurturing, creative, imaginative permission to just absolutely be in the space with your child. And I know that we're quite limited on time, so forgive me for jumping in, but it's brought me to something that I think is really important in this conversation, is that education cannot do this alone. It has to have some collaboration with parents, and you are very clearly a loving, nurturing father, and it's wonderful to hear that. But the reality is, that where we have abuse going on within the home, that is not the experience that young people are having. And if we're going to keep it on track with education, I think one of the difficulties education faces is the very parents that you want to get on board and engaging are the hardest to reach. And that does cause problems. I was part of a big rollout of a UK programme called the Links programme, which explored racism, sexism, homophobia, domestic abuse, sexual boundaries, consent, and part of what we called the C card scheme, where there was contraception. It was a fantastic programme. And what happened very quickly in the 3 secondary schools that it was run out in, we started to get major complaints from parents ringing in saying, why are you having this conversation with our young people? That's our job. So I took it upon myself to ring them individually. And it transpired that actually the parents weren't having those conversations, but were terrified and frightened. And my argument to that is, I understand that. And we have to go gently. If we go steaming in, we're going to get the doors shut on us. But when I said to the parents, trust me, what your young people are learning from social media and other forms are far more scary, shocking, dangerous and toxic than they will ever learn within this course, which is about let's open up conversation. Where do those beliefs come from? And I'm going to be bold and say most of the complaints that came our way, which stopped the course from being rolled out, were actually from families where that very, very belief system is in place. And that's the difficulty education faces, that unless we work with the parents, unless we get parents to work in a collaborative manner, it's always going to be an uphill battle. So I think our work lies in working with parents to just take the blinkers off, just start to allow yourself to understand where the real fears are coming from.
Absolutely, Denny. I couldn't have said it any better myself. And actually, so Denny's going to do a summary round off of today's show. So looking forward to that. And actually, James, you know, storytelling is the key, isn't it? You know, you say it is the key to unlocking, and that's really important. So James, I'm just going to ask you a question here. And I want to know, really, with everything that you're doing, what was it that what's your key message or mission, and what's the take home? So you're taking this in, what's your key message and what's the take home for the children, parents, or safeguarding?
Yeah, I think the key message is basically that every child doesn't need to suffer. I mean, you talk about education. I mean, education, the schooling system is too much focused on academia, and there's no emotional intelligences, and we don't understand them. We don't nurture them. We don't express them and feel them. And I find that, as a very quick example, I worked in a school with 72 different nationalities, and they'd had social workers in there, and because they had problematic children. But in the end, I said, look, I'm not doing anything like that. I'm not a social worker, but I'm a storyteller. And if I can teach the kids the art and power of storytelling, so not just me, but them sharing their stories, we can discover a lot. And it was from doing that in groups that, I mean, stories not related to anything, just storytelling. And you can tell the shy kids, the flamboyant ones, the ones that are more outspoken, the ones that are insecure, the ones that really want to elaborate on the story, and so on. In one session, I identified that these ones could have potential problems, and you could take it further with more storytelling. And I found that was a key way to get in. So storytelling became that magic. So if children can leverage on storytelling, then that relieves a lot of problems. Then kind of the takeaway is for parents to be open-minded in the way my vision is to work with everyone. It's not just children. I mean, it's parents and everybody, basically. I mean, you can look further in life. If you haven't addressed that emotional trauma that you had as a kid, then you're going to carry it through all your life. So it's about not just working with kids, you can work with parents. My focus is more with kids, because the sooner you capture this, the better it is for them later on. If you can help them with a trauma or a problem or a challenge whilst they're young, they overcome that. As I said, my daughter has no fear whatsoever now, right? And she's 6, right? But if we didn't address that, she would grow up with fear and everything would be a problem. Not saying that you couldn't deal with it later, it's just harder.
Mm. It's really interesting. You said something else there that I think would be a massive lateral conversation. I'm not going to really go down that rabbit hole now because it would be too long. But it's the emotional academics, and I think maybe that's something, Chris, Denny, we explore more of later on with the work that we're doing, because I have, like you, James, a real big issue with this. We live in the 21st century. We're still teaching what I was taught in the 20th century from grading, and the focus, I feel, is on grades. And whilst I do understand and respect there is PHSE, and we go back to the beginning of the show when Danny was saying the education system do great work, but we need more resources, we need more money, we need more investment to this conversation to help the emotional intelligence of children, because in the 20th century we didn't have mobile phones. We haven't caught up on that, but anyway, I digress, and I get really quite wound up about that, as you all know. So Twitter handles, if you're listening here today, you can find all of my panel on Twitter. You can find Chris Tuck _WWHF. That's Chris Tuck _WWHF. You can find Denny at Denny Corb, DENICORB, at Denny Corb. The show itself is the _CSA, and you can find me at EJ the Mentor. And our guest today, James, is on Twitter. He is Bern _disrupt _it, and Bern is BERN _disrupt _it. So do go and search them out, follow them, engage with them, and I'm sure Chris and James and Denny can share further with you this conversation that we've had today. But I'm going to hand you over now to Denny, because she rounds up the show. This is the best bit, where she just brings it all together in a couple of minutes. So over to you, Denny.
Okay, thanks, Emma Jane. Yeah, a massive topic, isn't it? So I'm actually going to try to be succinct in this. The first thing I'd like to say is safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. It doesn't matter whether you're in education, you're in the playground, you're in the canteen. It is absolutely everyone's responsibility. And until that is an ethos that's out there, we're always going to struggle. Lose the punitive approach. We know it doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work at all in schools, and it certainly doesn't provide a safe space. And what we need is for young people to have a safe space. And I know schools try very hard, but behaviour is still given a consequence, and that's punitive. So lose the punitive approach. Strip it right back. Let's go back to primary school. When you start at primary school, forget the tests, forget academia. Let's play. Let's role play. Let's tell stories. Let's learn how to interact, because not only will that tell us an awful lot about a young person at a much earlier age, it's also going to give the skills of socialization, and we've lost that. We've lost that with this focus on academics. And for anyone working within the system, no matter what your role is, I would say be aware, be informed, be curious, sit alongside, show interest, walk towards the behaviour rather than away. And non-engagement needs greater focus. And I think my final statement, which I have learned through some, like a sword, for some mistakes that I've made along the way, it's better to be wrong than to not act on it at all. And I think that's one of the strongest messages that I've been given, and I have learnt to be true. It's better to be wrong than not act at all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Denny. Better to be wrong than not to act at all. That's on my tattooed on my forehead every day. Regardless, if you think it could be something, act on it. Okay, look, Chris, I'm going to come to you from today's show. We just got a couple of minutes late. What one word could you use to summarize this entire conversation?
Communication. Keep the lines of communication open, truthful, transparent, and then we're open to growth and learning and change. And also belief. I wrote a story, which was unfortunately my true life story. And I got told I had an overactive imagination. That shut the abuse down. That stopped me from being saved from the abuse at home. So if you're going to encourage imagination, just be aware that that imagination could be the truth, and you might need to step in and provide an intervention.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, Chris. James, I'm going to come to you now. We can also find you www.daretochange.club. So go to that website and find everything about James's Facebook, his Instagram, and everything else that he does. www.daretochange.club. Just with a minute left, James, hearing what Chris just said there, you know, imagination can unlock so much. Believe that child, right?
Absolutely. I was a dreamer at school, and yeah, I find that was another way to escape. But I mean, storytelling, I think storytelling, everybody loves a good story. You know, so storytelling is the key. It helps people open up, it shows their emotion, it addresses problems, and you can share stories, you can tell stories, you can listen to stories. I mean, we all do it, we do it every day. Storytelling for me is the magic.
Storytelling is the magic. Well, look, we are at the end of today's show. I think we could have gone on not just for another hour, probably for another 3. Thank you to Denny. Thank you to Chris and to James Moffat, who has been exceptional today to get this conversation started. We are doing what we can to normalise difficult conversations. The more engaged we are, the more normal they become. And when we say normal, we use that loosely because everyone's normal is different. So, you know, this all becomes a win-win situation for this subject. I've shared the Twitter handles. I just want to say a big thank you to the team here at UK Health Radio, to Johan, to my panel, to Christine and everyone else who works with me behind the scenes to bring these shows forward. We couldn't do it without you. That's it from me. Until next time, keep safe, keep well, keep talking. Bye.